Welcome everybody to our media availability, media briefing. Welcome to those who are watching us over the internet or listening. Today is a House day. We're finishing Senate bills on the third reading calendar, and we'll be addressing House bills this afternoon. We have our Budget Director, Appropriations Chair, Senator Stevenson, and Senator Adams, our Majority Whip. We hope to have one of our Democratic colleagues join us for the diversity of voice here in our media availability. And with that beginning, we'll open it up to questions.
Can you talk about what may be changing in the tax reform proposal we discussed last week? Specifically, it sounds like there are issues with the way the income tax change was.
Conceptually, we're still talking about the same thing, broadening the base and lowering the rate. A couple of the scenarios we looked at where we were bringing the phase out down, we now discovered what impact that would have on different populations, and that caused us some pause that politically that's going to be pretty difficult. So I think we may take a more incremental approach to broadening the base and lowering the rate in the income tax. Sales tax back on food, broadening the base for our sales tax is still a high priority. That's where we are suffering the most, is in the growth of our general fund, which is funded by sales tax. And that comes on two fronts. That's sales tax back on food, and that's online, capturing that online base that we've been losing over the years.
Talk about when you say you discovered the impact that would have on different populations. Was it the size of income?
Yeah, the middle income, middle to middle lower income, actually, and some of the higher income were affected, but we're most concerned about hitting those families that are, right on the edge anyway.
What kind of number are you talking about when you say hitting those families right on the edge?
Well, I can't remember the exact, because these were just conceptual ideas, if you were above $50,000 of adjusted gross income, we thought that they would not be affected much. And where there was some significant tax increases there, we're going to relook at maybe a higher threshold of phasing out. And I'm going to start meeting with fiscal analyst staff this afternoon to start looking at some other proposals.
Okay.
But the concept is still the same. Broaden the base and lower the rate.
Right. You were looking at a $100,000 threshold when we talked last week.
Mm-hmm.
You're saying that ended up, that was $100,000 per taxpayer, not per household, right?
It's adjusted $100,000 of adjusted gross income per
Right,
person.
per person.
Yeah,
right.
that's the threshold at which it would phase out.
That's still too high. I mean, that's,
Well,
it would affect too many people in your mind.
It might be too low, or you could use a different phase out. You could phase it out quicker as you get closer to 100,000. But my guess is that we'll be moving it up somewhat.
Thank you.
Another thing that we could look at also, and this was part of the tax reform back in 2007, is we supercharge the credits. So your income is taxed at 5%, but your credits get 6%. You get a 6% of all your deductions as a credit. So I think we'll look at maybe also having it have both of those 5%, and that might have some. We'll see what effects that have, and I just don't know what they are at this point. Senator Adams, did you? Okay. Senator Hatch is with us. He came and talked to us on the floor today and was answering any questions. So I think you're available for questions from the media also, aren't you, Senator? It's just great to have you here.
Great to be
Looking
here.
good, and things are going a little bit better in Washington, at least from our perspective, right?
I think so. We hope so.
Yes, we're hoping.
Yeah.
So this is our chance, another chance we've got as Republicans.
It is, and it's going to be very, very interesting because President Trump is an interesting guy. There's no question about it, and I think he's there for the right reasons, and he's bringing some of the top people in this country in to work with him. And you know, there are people that are going to lose a lot of money by working in the government, but really want to help save the country. So I'm pretty impressed with him.
Good.
Yeah.
Any questions?
Senator, what would you say, Senator Hatch, I guess Senator gets a lot of people's attention in this room. What would you say to the Utahns who have been going to the town hall meetings and expressing frustration with the new president and the lack of congressional action to look into some of his conflicts and other issues that have been raised?
Well, first of all, give him a little time. He's only been there a month, and he has done more in a month than any president I've seen in my whole 40 years in the United States Senate. And he's serious. He's a doer. But the Democrats have thrown up every block they can to try and stop him from getting his cabinet people. In fact, it was just a couple weeks ago Monday that I was able to get the Secretary of the Treasury and the head of Health and Human Services confirmed. And that really hasn't happened to other presidents. And it's been deliberate. The Democrats vote in unison against everything that comes up. And they delay for delay's sake, refuse to even come to the markups in the Finance Committee, and markups to put people out like Mnuchin, who is now the Treasurer of the United States, and the Secretary for Health and Human Services too. So I had to go ahead without them, which caused a little bit of disconcertion, but they didn't have a thing a leg to stand on. So there really wasn't that much of an uproar about it. But you know, no president in history, to my knowledge, has had the difficulty that he's had to even get his administration up and running. But I've got to tell you, he's done an awful lot of things from an executive order standpoint that it would have taken other presidents 2 or 3 years to do. And some of those things are important for Utah. And I believe that he's going to do a number of things that will affect Utah, but for the better as we go along. But he's not going to stop working or stop moving ahead just because of the logjam in the United States Senate. And that's been a pretty important thing for us to all understand. And the Republicans back there are with him and working together, and we're hopeful that we can do more bipartisan work in the future. I've always been able to get things done because I've been able to bring Democrats and Republicans together. And thus far, it's been very difficult to do that.
Senator, you've seen a lot of transitions from one White House to another in your time in the Senate. How would you rate this administration? A lot of people are saying there's a lot of internal problems within the administration. You've got a president that doesn't have a political background. You hear complaints from some of his new cabinet members. They can't get their undersecretaries and other appointees through because of internal politics in the administration, for example.
Well, that's because the Democrats have been slowing everything down rather than cooperating. We always cooperated with them, and yet they're not cooperating with us. And they seem to hate Donald Trump. You know, I can understand dislike. What I can't stand is the hatred. And frankly, he's bringing some of the best people I've ever seen into government. And he makes decisions. If something goes wrong, take General Flynn. Now, General Flynn's a very fine man. He's an excellent leader. He's been an excellent general and member of armed services. But it didn't take him a nanosecond to say that you're through because he had lied to the vice president. That sends a message to everybody that, hey, we're not going to pussyfoot around here. We're not going to have people who lie to each other, and we're going to work together, or you're not going to be here. And I think it's shaken up everybody back there that this fellow means business. And yet he's had a rougher time getting up and running than any president in my experience. And it's been deliberate on the part of the Democrats to stop him. And he just blithely keeps going. I've got to say, I admire the man for his abilities, his intelligence, and his eager effort to try and turn this mess around. And it's going to take somebody like Donald Trump to turn this mess around, because we are in deep trouble. $20 trillion in debt, $100 trillion in unfunded liability, and a bureaucracy that's eating us alive, and much discontent within the states, some of which is caused because they hate Donald Trump. And you've got people like George Soros and others who are undermining just, I think, the very fabric of this country with some of the approaches that they're taking. So, and I don't mean to just single him out, there are others too. There are a whole bunch of them that really, I don't think have the well-being of our country at heart. Soros, for instance, doesn't really believe in America. He wants it to be a one-world government. Now, he has a right to feel that way, and I'd be the first to stand up for him. But you know, he's putting a lot of money in undermining Donald Trump, at least from what the media tells me.
Senator, how confident are you that the president will take some action on Bears Ears, and do you see him rescinding the monument or altering it in some way?
I'm very confident. I spent an hour with him down in the Oval Office, and that was one of the topics that came up. And I have to say, you know, that's a disaster, because we as a delegation and the governor were willing to work this out with the administration and willing to have certain amounts of wilderness and so forth. And they just ignored us and went ahead and made it another monument without any consideration of the feelings of the people in the local area, without any real considerations for Utah and its leadership. And frankly, I believe that he may very well rescind that, and then we'll work on doing it the way it should be done. And that is with the help of our governor, state legislature, and congressional delegation, and the local people doing it so that it's done so there's a lot less antagonism and you know, a lot less difficulty. I think he will, but we'll just have to see. I certainly made a case to him, and that was part of the reason we spent an hour together. And I personally believe that he's going to help us to resolve that problem in a way that will be just, right, and in accordance with the feelings of our fellow Utahns, and especially those in that county. That county, you know, is 97% owned by government, you know, and very, very few people living in that county, and they're just treated like dirt because of it, and I don't like that. And we have to take into consideration the local people, and not these outside groups that come in with all their environmental extremism. But I personally hope he'll help us to straighten that out and get it done right, so that virtually everybody, including environmentalists, if they're honest, will say that's a good solution. So let's hope that we can get that done. But it's not over, I have to say that.
The same with Grain Staircase, Senator. Will the president
I
act on
brought
that?
that up too. I did bring that up, and I said, look, that was decided 60 miles south of Utah, with only one Utahn there. Nobody in the congressional delegation had any say in it. We weren't even consulted. It was done purely for political advantage, and frankly, not very good advantage at that. It was done vindictively as far as I was concerned. And it tied up the largest body of clean burn, high moisture content, low sulfur content coal in the nation today. And that's a huge resource for Utah that could in the future, not now, but in the future, be a lifesaver for the state of Utah. So I believe that I advocated with him that we should at least allow access to that property. Nobody's going to mine it at the present time. It'd be too expensive. But it's something that is a resource that we ought to have always ready if our country needs it. And we get into another world war, or we get into other energy problems that we can't solve, that coal is clean burn, high moisture content, low sulfur content coal. It's what you call environmentally sound coal. And what the Democrats have done to that is just wrong. So I'm hopeful that he'll consider that as well. And I raised it with him, and he was kind of appalled that they would tie up one of the largest bodies of clean burn, environmentally sound coal in the world today, and do that at the expense of Utah, and hide it under an environmental approach that most Utahns would support it, except for that. And we're not against wilderness, we're not against monuments, but we want some say in what happens in these areas. I look at our governor worked assiduously hard with his delegation to try and solve the problem of Bears Ears. We didn't have a chance on the other, but they wouldn't even give us the time of day on it. Just went ahead and did it because it was politically advantageous to them, they thought. But you know, I have to commend our governor and the whole congressional delegation for trying to resolve these problems in a way that would be environmentally sound, but yet treat Utah as it should be treated.
How would that work, keeping the Grand Staircase to Escalante National Monument and allowing access to the coal?
Well, you just provide access to the site.
Can the president do that himself, or would that take congressional
I
action?
think he could do it. I actually think he could do it himself. If you can create the monument yourself, you can modify that monument. He's not going to do away with the monument, but he would be able legally to create the access to this great treasure that may save Utah and the country someday. You know, but it certainly would right a wrong that occurred without any consideration to Utah. And I think we'd all applaud that. I don't know anybody in Utah except the most radical environmentalists that wouldn't applaud that, having that access.
Any other questions?
We
People
have,
from our viewers?
from our viewers, we have a couple of them. So the first one is, one of our viewers would like to know what your favorite bill is. Of the new bills that have been coming out these last couple of weeks, they'd like to know what your favorite one is.
My favorite
It's the perfect pitch. You can talk about whatever you want.
That puts you on the spot.
Wow. Do any of you have let me think for a minute. Any of you have a favorite bill? Yeah, it was my favorite bill, the Bears Ears resolution. All of us.
They did that.
Yeah, and let me just say, that was, I think, a good move by us, and a lot of people have bemoaned that decision by the legislature and the governor. But let me just lay out for you the process that Senator Hatch, and just as an added witness of the insufficiency of the process. My wife, Melissa, works for has been the recess aide at our local elementary school for 13 years. And she deals with all kinds of issues on the playground. Children, jealousies, all kinds of things that come up. And at night, before bed, oftentimes she'll talk about some of the things that go on, and we have to chuckle a little bit. But a couple of years ago, after being president of the Senate for about a year, I thought, the politics don't change, the people just get older. The same kind of politics exists here in Washington. And to lay out exactly in playground politic terms what happened with Bears Ears is there was a process taking place. Or, as my wife often would tell me a story about groups of children on the playground that couldn't agree on something, and there was an argument. And they came to my wife, Mrs. Niederhauser, take our side. Those the other group is wrong, and we're right, and they won't agree with us. So, and we're not getting everything that we want. So please take our side. And then the other group would come up and say, Mrs. Niederhauser, take our side. We're right in this situation. They're not listening to us, and we don't want to give up any ground. But wisely, my wife has always said, you work it out. I am not taking sides in this discussion. And the opposite of that happened with the designation of the Bears Ears. There was communication going on. There were parties at the table, but a few parties decided they weren't getting everything that they wanted. So they went to a president and convinced him, because he somehow has this power, which is beyond me, that one person has that kind of power in this country. When we have a Congress that has to weigh in on all these big issues, it's beyond me that we have such executive power. But that's what happened. And guess what? If my wife had taken sides on somebody's side in those arguments, there would have been a group that was disenfranchised, that felt like they hadn't got fair treatment. Well, that's exactly what's happened here, and you don't get a very good process. But when everybody has to come together, you might not get everything that you want. You might have to compromise a little bit. Then, there's a better process, and everybody at least feels like they've been heard. So that's a long answer to a short question, but.
Okay. Next question, there's quite the list today. How do you expect the balance of power between the federal and state governments to change during Trump's presidency?
Well, as we mentioned before, probably here, that there is definitely an imbalance between the states and the federal government. You can tell by just how much money they spend. $3.7 trillion was the federal budget, I think, in 2015. And the states combined, all 50 states, their budgets combined were $1.3 trillion, excluding federal funds. So you can see, because money is where the power is where the money's at, you can see that there is an imbalance going on between the states and the federal government. And we have our Commission on Federalism creating a list of unfunded mandates, of some grievances where we feel like the federal government has usurped power over the states where they shouldn't have. We have our commission working out a list of those grievances, and they're going to put it in a resolution, and we're going to pass it and send it back to Washington, because we have a president who said, I want to send the power back to the people. And we have our congressional delegation that support that. So I think it's time that we send them a list and say, here's what we'd like. We'd like to have you release that power back to the states. It's very difficult for 50 states to get together and have a convention and then have 38 states agree to it at the end. But we wish Congress wouldn't take that power away from us to start with. And so anyway, we'll should have that resolution, and it'll probably be passed out this next week.
Very appreciative of Senator Hatch and his leadership on federalism. Our congressional delegation understands the states' rights and what the most of the decisions ought to be made here. And I think with the new president, President Trump has been pretty adamant about the fact that he'd like to divest that power. And you see it happening with some of his executive orders and the things that he's trying to do. I look at it and somebody says, what do you think of the new administration? And I think the free market's a pretty good indication. When he was first elected, I heard the stock market was going to tumble, that we were probably going to have the biggest recession and crash since I don't know when, but I think last I checked, the stock market was over 20,000 and it's up to 20,700 and still going up. The decisions he's making are good for our economy. If we can move our economy ahead, maybe we can pay down some of that national debt. That helped in the Reagan years as the economy was very robust and people were paying their taxes and we were able to pay for things as we went. I'm very encouraged by this new president and by the fact that we may get some of those powers back. And Senator Hatch, you've been just a great leader. You've been a great, great leader. You're in a great position now, and we appreciate your leadership.
Oh, thank you, appreciate it.
Thanks everyone for being here, and thanks especially to Senator Hatch for joining us. We always appreciate him coming and talking about what's going on in Washington, and there's some pretty positive things going on, at least from a state concern, so thank you for being here.
Mr. President, it's a privilege to be here with you, and I appreciate the kind way you treat us when we come up here.
And we'll see everyone tomorrow.
Okay.